And here's the GitHub repository for the tool that we are using today. It's a really useful resource for you if you want to explore more after the workshop about Code Engine, and so many useful examples and code patterns on this tool. And finally, if you are joining us from different platforms like YouTube, you can also join us on Crowdcast through this link here, where we are interacting live and, talking to each other, and hopefully you will enjoy it with us. And yeah, this is the again the cloud signup link for you to make sure that you will be able to follow along with Mustafa step by step throughout the hands-on lab. Now, one more thing is, since this is a cloud native workshop, it's really also good to talk about the free certifications that you can get on IBM Cloud. They are really useful badges, IBM Cloud Essentials, Cloud Course. So you get to learn all the basics about the cloud, and you can share your achievements in your network and explore more along with us. So you will find the slides as well available for you online. You can access these links as well from the slides, or you can take a screenshot of it. Now let's get started. We're going there, okay? We will be covering so many things in this workshop. So we'll cover from the basics of what is containerization. Then we're going to talk about serverless and the Knative project. So if there is any jargon or any new words for you guys, we'll make sure that we're going to explain them very well, so we can later on talk about Code Engine. So Jenna will be introducing to you Code Engine, and then finally Mustafa will be showing you how you can use this amazing tool. Now let's start with the question, what is a container? This is a really nice diagram that I really like to explain the story of how we went from traditional deployment all the way to container deployment. So back in the early days, traditional deployment was the way where organizations would host their applications on a physical hardware with its own operating system. So you'd have multiple applications sharing the same environment, but one of the issues that came along with it was actually one application probably consuming more resources than needed, which causes other applications to crash and not being able to run properly. Was actually to have each application in its own physical environment with its own hardware and operating system. But this was a very costly kind of solution. A more cost-effective solution was the virtualized deployment, which kind of similar way of traditional deployment, but you wouldn't have many hardware and many physical components to it. You would just simply divide your existing hardware into virtual machines. So you would have each virtual machine, like a group of virtual machines that are sharing the same hardware and operating systems. On top of them is a hypervisor where you have your virtual machines, and each virtual machine has the applications with its own binaries and libraries and the operating system. So you could have different operating systems for your applications. The cool thing with this approach is that your applications in each virtual machine are isolated, so there's no virtual machine is going to interrupt the other. A much more effective deployment, which is the container deployment that came from the virtualized deployment. This container deployment eliminates the need for operating systems. So you don't have to rely on operating system with that. You would just need your application and the binaries and libraries, packaged in this container in its own isolated environment. So you don't have to worry much about the infrastructure. You would only have to care about your code and the libraries that you're going to need and the requirements to run your application. All of this is running on top of a container runtime. And the cool thing is that it is portable by means that you can run the same application on multiple operating systems. Now, we talked about what is a container. Now, with a container, you're actually going to need a container image. Now, what is a container image? container image is kind of looks like this, in which you would have, it consists of layers. These layers are image layers, and they are only read-only layers, and usually they are the older ones, which you cannot edit. And then you have the latest layer, which is the read and write layer. You will have all of the requirements and any commands that you're going to need to run for your application to, isolate it in it. And you can actually use container images from, like you're going to need a place to install and access and use these container images for your applications. So you'd have, for example, like, Docker and Quado.io, for example, to use these container images. So this is what is known as container registry. You would have your images like Docker Hub, that are saved in Docker Hub or in Quado.io, for example. So you can upload them into these container registries and access them publicly or privately. It really depends on how you want to, publish your container image. So sometimes these these registries can be private. Sometimes they can be public, and you can use. There are plenty of options that you can just use instantly, similar to what we will be attempting today. So we'll be just using Docker Hub to deploy an application right away. Now we have covered, a summary of what is containers, but we're going to jump right into serverless. Hopefully, this is not going to be, too quick to explain, but we're just covering the concepts. So we will, move into the main concept, which is Code Engine. Now, what is serverless? Now, serverless, it does not mean that, you don't have servers. Serverless means that, it just eliminates the need to focus on the infrastructure. As developers, we really like to, focus on our code more than, focusing on the infrastructure or worrying about whatever relies underneath. And this is where, serverless can be helpful for us. So this is a similar diagram to what I showed earlier, and it's really useful because it can show you a comparison between containers and serverless. So in serverless, you would have your applications being run on demand. Okay. So and your applications are divided into functions instead. So for example, you would have, let's say, a login feature. So it could be a function, it could be an application. So this login function is only called when you have someone that is using the login feature in your application. Say that you have no one that is using it, so the function will not run, so it will be scaled down to 0. Well, on the other hand, if you have multiple people who are using this function, it will scale up based on demand. So this is the beauty of serverless, I would say. And you'll get to explore how we're combining both containerization and serverless with Code Engine. Now, another concept that is around containerization and serverless is Knative. We kind of skipped through what is Kubernetes. Now, a little bit of introduction about Kubernetes. It is a container orchestration platform. So it handles all of these containers for you that you are using for, like, when you're using Docker file and so on. And Knative is an open source project that helps you to run serverless application in Kubernetes environment. So it kind of combines both containerization and serverless together. So you would have your applications automatically scale up and down based on what you need. And eventually it will help you to manage these applications easily, and you don't have to worry much about the infrastructure, or it will just handle it for you. So that's one cool thing about it. So it makes it much easier to run serverless applications in a Kubernetes environment. And then finally, and actually, you can say that Code Engine is kind of coming from this idea of Knative project. And then finally, there are different ways of cloud deployment models. So if you are familiar with, different, compute options on the cloud, so a more technical, I would say, and a more, like very infrastructure focused kind of environments, which are like the virtual machines and the bare metal servers, in which you would have to set up all of these environments, and you would need some people to actually work on these for you. So it's kind of like that when it comes to Kubernetes clusters as well. So you'd need someone, an administrator, for example, to handle all of the infrastructure side for it. It allows you for more control of on your environment. It helps you with, customize your experience and how you're going to build your applications. But if you are more of a developer and you just want to deploy your application faster, there are platform as a service application softwares and function as a service software. So to leverage the use of serverless, for example, to increase the development speed. So, it highly depends on what kind of skills that you have and what kind of approach you want to eventually build your application. Now, moving on, I will hand over to Jenna, who will be talking to you about Code Engine.
Okay. All right. So Code Engine is, what we're focusing on today. Everything serverless. We're focusing on containerized serverless workloads. So what exactly is Code Engine? We've said it a few times. We've mentioned it. So Code Engine is an IBM Cloud fully managed serverless platform that runs all of your containerized workloads. So this includes web applications, microservices, event-driven functions, or batch jobs. So Code Engine even will build your container images for you from your source code using its source to image feature. So to get started, we're gonna take a look today, getting hands-on with a lot of these things that we're talking about today. We're gonna get hands-on with, so to be able to see them in action. So what exactly can IBM Cloud Code Engine do for you? So as I mentioned, IBM Cloud Code Engine can create container images from source code using source to image. You can access your source code in repositories, both public and private. It can push images to public and private registries. It's integrated into IBM Cloud and all IBM Cloud services. So it makes integration with, let's say you want to add machine learning, IBM Watson machine learning models, or Watson chatbot, or you want to add OAuth integration with our App ID service. All of our IBM Cloud products and services are easily integrated into your Code Engine applications. Code Engine will handle and hide all Kubernetes cluster provisioning, configuring, scaling, and managing servers for you. It will auto-scale your workloads up and down, and even to zero when you don't have any active requests coming into your application. And Code Engine is built on open source Kubernetes, Knative, Istio, and Tecton. So it's completely built on top of open source technologies, and it will keep your applications and your batch jobs really flexible and portable. There we go. So how many of you are familiar with applications and batch jobs? So just feel free to, you know, if you're familiar with apps, type apps in the chat. If you're familiar with batch jobs, type batch jobs. If you're familiar with both, go ahead and type both. Because that's pretty much what we're talking about and looking at when we're working with Code Engine. So by default, creating the project is also going to what is this? Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, sorry. Before we jump in and take a look at all of these things in action, it's really important to understand more about the types of workloads that Code Engine supports. And as we're going to do a little bit of an overview before we dive in, Code Engine supports two types of workloads. So as we just mentioned, it supports applications and batch jobs. There we go. So when we're talking about applications, applications are just any workloads that typically respond to incoming messages or requests. So whether those messages are API calls, web page requests, events, or any other HTTP requests, applications process those messages. Code Engine will then scale your applications based on the amount of incoming traffic to meet that demand. So likewise, it will also scale your application back down when there's a reduction in traffic, even down to 0, as I mentioned. So this means that you only pay when your application is actually running, and you don't pay anything when it's scaled down to 0. Now, when we're talking about batch jobs, so batch jobs are slightly different from applications, as you'll see once we get into the console when we go to create a Code Engine application or batch job from either a container image or source code. You'll see at the very top, it'll say application batch job, right? And most of the runtime semantics that you'll see there are almost the same. So batch jobs are slightly different from applications, and that they typically don't respond to incoming messages. So they're often referred to as run to completion tasks. Batch jobs are meant to be created, then they execute a particular operation, and then when they're done, they exit. So unlike applications, batch jobs will not automatically scale. Rather, the number of instances are specified when the job is executed. So we indicate, you know, the number of instances that we want before we run our batch job. So aside from not receiving inbound traffic, which is the mechanism by which they scale, batch jobs are similar to applications in just about every other aspect. Now, one thing I want to just show you here to give you an example of. So in addition to our IBM Cloud CLI, and just like we have our OpenShift cluster CLI, and kube control, right? So we have a Code Engine CLI as well. So as you'll see, once we work through the workshop today, you'll be able to see that everything that we do today can actually be done in 5 commands. So it's very quick and easy to, as you'll see, to work with Code Engine from the Code Engine console, as well as the command line. So a lot of times, you know, it can be a lot of clicking in the console, or it can be, you know, a ton of commands to do minimal amount of work. As you can see here, you can do a lot with very few commands. You can create a project, Code Engine project, create a new application from a container image or from source code. You can run, we have a load generator that will demonstrate our auto scale feature that you'll see in a bit. You can create a batch job and run a batch job in 5 commands from your terminal. So in under a minute, you can do all of these things that we're gonna go through today. So when we're talking about Code Engine, I want to go into a little more detail for you. You know, because why Code Engine, right? There's a lot of platform as a service offerings. There's Kubernetes. There's all of these things, right? So at a high level, Code Engine is a merging of all of the various as a service containerized platforms, all kind of merged into one. So whether your workload or your container is going to be running a function, as we saw in the diagram, or a service function, whether it's there for a platform as a service type of application, which we're referring to web pages or 12-factor applications, whether you're running a batch job, which as we just saw, doesn't respond to HTTP requests. It's just a standalone executable that runs on demand, and then when it's done, it goes away. Or you're responding to HTTP requests, which are things like eventing, infrastructure kinds of things. It doesn't matter. As long as your containerized workload, as long as you containerize your workload, Code Engine can run it for you. We're going to run it in the cloud and manage all of the infrastructure behind the scenes for you. It's not a matter of managing the infrastructure. Code Engine also has a provides a simplified developer experience. So even though we're running Kubernetes, Knative, Istio, and other open source technologies under the cover, you don't need to know that they're actually there. Like, you don't have to learn kube control to talk to Kubernetes and all that other stuff. We've simplified everything to the point where you only need to focus on giving the inputs into what you want to deploy. So that means you give us your source code if that's where you want to start your flow. You give us your container image if that's where you want to start your flow. It's up to you. Then you just indicate the runtime semantics that you want to use for those workloads. So if you want to scale based on the load coming in, or you want to scale, or you want provision a certain amount of memory, you just decide yes or no, and you only need to give the raw numbers or runtime semantics you want, and Code Engine will figure out how to make the infrastructure match your desired semantics. So you as a developer can pretty much just chuck your application and say, go run this for me. Now you can get back to coding, which is where you want to be spending most of your time as a developer. You should not be spending your time learning Kubernetes, managing Kubernetes, or anything else related to the infrastructure. So let's talk about what you can actually do in there. So if you take a look at the blue box we have on our diagram here, So as we mentioned, Code Engine is a public managed container platform. It's within IBM Cloud. It will auto scale your workloads for you. As we mentioned, not just the application, but when we're talking about auto scaling out your workloads for you, we're not just referring to your application that you've deployed. We're also referring to the Kubernetes clusters that are running behind the scenes. So Code Engine will scale your Kubernetes clusters out for you, and you only pay when your applications are actually running. So if everything scales down to 0, which we'll see here shortly, you're not charged anything at all. Code Engine also supports scaling out based on resource usage. So instead of the number of requests coming in, Code Engine will scale out either up or down your applications and workloads based on CPU and memory usage as well. Another great feature, Code Engine builds in security to your applications automatically for you. So as you'll see when we deploy our applications, you'll be able to see up in the URL for your application, it will start with HTTPS. So you don't have to worry about setting up the SSL certificates, managing the load balancers, managing the runtime isolation between various workloads running in the cluster. Code Engine does all of that for you. Code Engine will also build your images for you if you want to start with source code. So as I mentioned briefly, you can integrate any IBM Cloud services, and not only can you talk to them, you can tell Code Engine which IBM Cloud services you want to talk to, and Code Engine will then inject any credentials and the coordinates of those instances. For instance, Watson machine learning model that you've created, or a chatbot that you've created, or an app ID OAuth instance that you've created, right? Code Engine will inject the credentials and the coordinates of those instances into your application for you. So your application doesn't have to figure out where your credentials are, what secrets they're stored in. They'll be available to you as environment variables automatically, which you'll see in just a minute. Unlike other platforms where there's going to be limits in terms of how long your things can run for, how much memory they can use, Code Engine doesn't have any of those limits. So if you want to run something for 12 hours, or you want to run high memory applications, go for it. We're not going to stop you. Unlike other platforms, you don't have artificial limits imposed on you. Lots of available platforms for managing workloads. They impose very strict limits in terms of your memory and CPU usage. However, they can be great for smaller workloads. There are other platforms that might have a great UI, but they don't scale down to 0 or give more complex features. For instance, the usability of some serverless platforms and containers, etc., can be pretty complex and not really great to work with. So regardless of how you view your workload, all workloads can be run on one application, and all the underlying infrastructure will be managed for you, source code or container image. You don't have to learn all of these technologies. You don't have to understand everything under the covers. The complexities of the infrastructure is hidden from you, but you can still use the underlying technologies to communicate with Code Engine. So as we walk through, pay attention to how little work you're actually having to do to get your applications and batch jobs up and running. Let's see here. So just to give you a little sneak peek here. I'm going to just show you quickly what we're going to be building. One of the things we're going to be building in today's workshop. So let's just take a look at it. So as you can see here, we have this max object detector. This is what the deployed application looks like. So what you're able to do is you're able to upload an image, or you can also use your webcam, which I'll show you in just a second. And the IBM Code 18's max object detector will actually do some machine learning on your image and detect which images what types of things are in your image. So as you can see here, with 98.7% accuracy, the max object detector determined that this is a person, and with 98.8% accuracy, determined that this was a bear. I guess this bear is more a bear than this baby is a person. But however, if the child in the photo was facing forward, it'd probably, have a higher accuracy. But as you can see here, if we look at these labels found, it has a person and a teddy bear. So these are associated with these labels here from it analyzing the photo that you upload. And we have a probability threshold here, which you can play around with. We don't need to worry too much about that. And as you can see here, so once you deploy your application, you can actually give permission and use the webcam on your camera. On your computer or your laptop. So you can scan anything from your webcam, and it will do the same thing in real time. So 82%, we're 82% positive this is a cell phone, and 72% positive that this is some scissors. So you can do this in real time. This is just an example of that. And as you can see up here, we have indicators here. We have a cell phone and a scissors. So I'm going to pass things over so we can get into the hands-on portion of this of the workshop today. So let me close this.
Okay, thank you, Jenna. I would like to start by thanking Jenna and Masa for the great presentation. And first and foremost, I would like to make sure every one of you have your IBM Cloud up and running, because we're going to have a great webinar or a great hands-on today. Most of the people would say this is the funniest, or this is the most joyful part of any webinar. So please go ahead and make sure you have your IBM Cloud account up and running. So I'm just going to give everyone like 3 minutes or something to make sure everyone has his IBM Cloud up and running. You don't need to have anything installed for you to be able to carry on and actually do or deploy the whole application we're going to deploy today. So you will just need your IBM Cloud account. And to get your account, if you don't already have one, I think my friends have shared the link many times in the chat section. And of course, you also have a green button at a green button right here at the bottom of your screen. In front of you, you should be seeing a button saying workshop resources. If you go ahead and click that, you would see a shared text sharing all the resources we'll be needing today. And the first link would be the link to create an IBM Cloud account, and simply it would ask you which mail do you want to register with, and your name, and then some password, and then it would send you a verification mail. So you would have to head back to your mail which you have registered with, and then confirm your registration to IBM Cloud. And then you're set and you have your IBM Cloud up and running. And then the second thing you would need for today is that you would have to have access to Code Engine, which is actually on IBM Cloud. So mainly what you have to do to get access to that is that you have to actually use the second link we have in the shared section, or in the shared doc, which is which says get your free IBM Code Engine instance. So you'd have to go to the URL and then insert the key lab, which is CROX, and please make sure it's all in lowercase, and insert the mail you have registered with. And again, you would submit it, and you would have to hit back again to your mail and confirm or accept the invitation to the new account, which is AdvoWork, which is a paid account, which would get you some access to Code Engine, because actually Code Engine doesn't have a free tier. However, IBM Cloud account have many other free tier services that you can play around with. So I'm just going to give like another 1 minute to make sure everyone got his IBM Cloud account up and ready. And please, if anyone have performed all of the steps I said, please let me know in the chat section. So if you created your account and you can see your account is working, thank you, Shruk. So if you created the account and you can see it's up and working, and if you have asked to join the AdvoWork, or if you done the part of the lab and inserted your mail and verified it, and then you got back to your IBM Cloud account, and you can see 2 accounts now, your account and then a second account called AdvoWork, which is actually the one we'll be using today. Let me know in the chat section.
And Mustafa, did you want to share your screen?
Yes, sure. I'm just making sure everyone has his account ready. Let me share my screen. So I think it should be enough time for everyone to create his account. I think we're good to start with our workshop or hands-on part. So please, if anyone has any problem creating his account or actually having access to AdvoWork, the second account using the second link we have, please go ahead. Please go ahead and let us know in the chat section so that we can help you. Having that said, let's go ahead and start our hands-on part. So mainly what we're going to do today is that we are going to deploy a container or an image of some application, which is actually an object detection application. And another great thing that we have that also ready and made for us. And we have some great website here, which is IBM Model Asset Exchange, where we can find many great models already built for us. You can see that we have many models performing on different types of data, like text or images or videos and so on, with different data and different types of models. As you can see, we have featured here, we have deployable models and we have trainable models. However, and actually trainable models is some models that it is trained for you, and you can actually train it with some additional data for your specific use case. However, we're going to use one of the featured models for today, which is object detection. So let me share the link for Max right here. If you actually want to deploy another model or another application, you are free to do so. So just go ahead. Let's open this model right here and see what it looks like. So as you can see, it's an object detection. It's simply an object detector model. It's trained or built using TensorFlow, and it's trained on the Coco dataset, and it has 80 different high-level classes. And you can see we have different types of deployments that we can use, which is deploying from a Docker Hub and actually deploying on a Red Hat or deploying on Kubernetes. However, we're interested in deploying that on Code Engine. So what we need is actually only the image for that. And to actually get to the image, you don't have to actually do this. I'm just showing you where we got our image from, but you don't have to do all of these steps. So as you can see, you can deploy it directly from Quay, which is an image registry. So all we need is this, which is our image, which is one we are going to deploy today, which is on Quay. So we only need to have this link. However, you don't actually to do all of these steps, because in the hands-on part or in the hands-on link, it's actually provided right here. Again, also this link can be found in the shared doc, and you can access it using the workshop resources button at the bottom of your screen. Let's get back to IBM platform right here, and to access Code Engine, what you have to do is to actually click right here, and you can see that we have a section for Code Engine. We can go ahead and go directly there. And actually, to understand how easy it is to deploy an application from an image or from even a source code, you can actually just insert your source code or your GitHub repo right here, or just insert the image right here, and everything should be good. So let's go ahead and grab the image. So here is our image on Quay. So all I need to do is just insert it right here and just say start creating. It will be asking you, do you want it as application or as a job? So we are going to deploy it today as an application, and then you'll be asked to give it a name. You can just leave it as is or just change it to whatever you want, and then you can select a project for it. If you don't have any project, you can actually create a project. So let me create a new project. I'm going to name it 3M for instance, and then you can choose a location for it. However, for you, it's always recommended to leave the default stuff because it's like a trial account, so you don't have to change many stuff. So just if you want, you can just choose a name for your project and leave everything else as is. And then I'm going to create. So it's now creating a new project with the name 3M for me. And in this project, I'm going to deploy my application. So let me choose it. And then as you can see, we have different ways. You can deploy from a container image or directly from a source code by providing your GitHub repo. However, we're going to deploy using a container image. Another thing is that listening port is defaulted to 8080. However, we want it to be 5000 for our application today. And then you can specify also the runtimes. However, I'm not going to play with this because it's not very big for me. However, for you, for the trial application, you might have to reduce this to have some less CPU or memory, because it's as I said before, it's a trial account, and then you have to insert or specify the minimum number of instances and the maximum number of instances, and then you'd have to also specify the maximum number of concurrent requests, and we'll see how important this is in a minute. And then if you would like to provide some environment variables to your application, and that's it. Remember how simple was it? We just got into Code Engine, we inserted our image, and then we give it we give our application a name, and we select a project. And if there was no project, we actually created one, and then you go ahead and create it. And as you can see, we are now inside Code Engine, projects, and 3M, and then applications. And as you can see, this is the interface. You can see right here. Here is the code. It's actually from container image, and here is the listening port, which actually 5000 as we actually specified it. And you can actually go ahead and change the runtime if you want to, and also change the variables, environment variable if you want to. And as you can see, our application is already ready. So as you can see, it was very simple, and how little it was, or how like few steps we needed to do to actually get our application up and running. So as you can see, this is not the way we should see our application. However, I intended to do so that I can show you the documentation of our API. It's a Swagger website or Swagger documentation of our API. And as you can see, you have this method right here, which is two get methods. The first one is actually returning the list of all the labels in our model, and the second one is actually returning the metadata of our model, and the third one, which is the most important one, which is actually the prediction. So we can actually expand it and try our model from here. So if I choose this image right here, and then I execute it, you should now see the return JSON, and it should have two objects. As you can see, we have two objects, a teddy bear and a person. However, if you want to actually access the application, you would actually have to append this URL with app, and then go ahead and access it. As you can see, here is a like GUI of our application. You can increase this probability threshold, and then you can submit an image. I'm going to actually choose the same image. Choose it, and then I'm going to submit it, and it should actually detect there's a person here and there's a teddy bear right here. So, and it's also actually predicting this is a bench, but with a very like 52% accuracy. So if we increase the probability threshold right here, you'd see this this label actually disappears, as you can see. So as you can see, this is our application. In a few minutes, we were able to actually deploy a containerized application. And if we get back to our application right here, we can see there is one instance running. And if we leave this application without running or without sending any API requests to it, it would be just transformed or downgraded or downscaled to 0 instance. So it won't be actually using any resources, and it won't be costing you any money. And another thing, or another great thing about Code Engine is that it can actually automatically upscale for you. And to try that, we are going to try and actually send too many requests to our application. So let me share a simple web application where you can actually try and overload your application or overload your object detector. Let me get that right here. And as you can see, it's saying just insert the URL. So I'm not just going to actually send a request. I'm just going to open the URL for our application and send too many requests. Now, look at that. We have only 0 instances because we're not using any the application right now, and it's not having any load. So it downscaled to 0 instance. Let me just go ahead and now try to generate some load and query our application so many times. And we should see this increasing. Now it's getting to be 1 instance. It should increase more. So give it a minute. And as you can see in the runtime, you can actually specify, and now it's jumping to 5 instances instead of 1. Now it's 9, and it's going to get to the maximum and stop. Actually, you can actually specify the minimum if you want your application always running, and you don't have to wait for the time for your application to start up. However, it's just a few seconds or less because it's a container. It's not a virtual machine anymore, so it doesn't take too much or too long to actually start. But if you want your application always ready, you can actually have the minimum number of instances to 1. And if you want your application to have more availability, you can actually have a maximum number of more than 1. And in this view here in revisions and traffic, you can see all the revisions, or in another word, all the versions of your application. So if I changed anything of my application and then I submitted this change, you should see another revision right here, and you can see it should be running on the status of your application. So this is how to do it from a GUI. Let me also show you. And since we're using the UI, let me also show you how to create a batch job. So if we go to our project right here, 3M, you can actually see there is a section for jobs here, and you can create a job. And actually what you have to do is very similar to what we did in the application. However, the changes that, or the difference that when you create the job, it's not going to be running automatically. You have to actually submit a job run, and then it can run. So let's get back to our application. As we can see, here's our application. So in the same sense, we can do all of that using the CLI. And if you want to do it locally using your terminal, let me share two important docs where you can actually get the CLI for IBM Cloud and also for Code Engine CLI. However, if you don't want to do this, actually we have a great section here in IBM Cloud, which is IBM Cloud Shell, which has all of the stuff you need already installed for you. So if you actually go there, you can actually deploy your application directly from there. And to do so, it's also just a few lines of code. You would have to target the resource group and also target the region. It's running. Okay, so I'm just going to target the resource group default. And as you can see, it's also targeting the region US South. You can actually change this if you want to EU, Europe, or whatever you want. For now, I'm going to leave it as is in US, and I've targeted the default resource group. Let me go ahead and create a project. And inside this project, we're going to create our application. So to create a project, you can actually type in or insert the command IBM Cloud CE for Code Engine, and then project create and give it a name using the flag name. Let me do that. Yeah, it failed because we have a project also called Sandbox. So let me name that to Sandbox 1. And it's now creating our project. It should take less than a minute to be provisioned. Now, if we actually go to the projects here, we should see a Sandbox 1 getting created. Okay, the next step is that we are going to create an application inside our project, and to do so, we're going to use a very simple command, which is IBM Cloud CE for Code Engine, and then project, and then create the name Sandbox. Sorry, this is creating the project. After creating the project, we are going to actually create our application using IBM Cloud CE application create, and then a name, and give it a name, and then we are going to specify the flag image, as we are going to deploy our application for from an image, and then we are going to override the default port, which is 8080 with port 5000. So we're going to give it the flag port and then 5000. Let me take this right here and insert it. However, our project is not ready yet. It should take a couple more seconds, and then it should be done. Let me have a look at the chat section and see if someone have any problem that I can help with. So again, if you're trying this, please remember this is a trial version or a trial account you have. So try to minimize or to use very limited resources in order for your application to be provisioned actually, and try. I can't pre-select any project, unfortunately, either. Shuruk, I don't follow what is your problem. So are you able to create a project at all? Not even create a project? Are you sure you're selecting the right account, which is AdvoWork? You have to go right here and choose the account which is called AdvoWork, which is the shared account for today's application. I can create or select. Yep, it is. I did. I think we might have some problem with the lab environment, maybe. However, it should be working. Yes, probably limitation. However, there should be some deployed application you can actually access. So you can see there is an application called Mesa or an application called 3M And actually, the application code stream is the same one as the one I'm deploying right now. And finally, our project is actually provisioned. If we go there, we can see our project is done. Let me refresh to make sure it's actually done. And yes, it's active right now, so we can just go ahead and create our application. If we go inside that, we should see a new application called Max Object Detector. And it's deployed right now. It has 0 instance. The last thing we're going to be doing is actually check the status of our application. And with that, we have seen how to deploy a containerized or a container image using only a few lines of commands, or actually without any command lines, using only the GUI, only providing the image place or where the image resides, and actually just specifying some runtime semantics, like what type of resources we want to use for our application, and if you want to provide some environment variables and so on, and just provide that, and everything is done for us. So we don't have to worry about the infrastructure management. We don't have to worry about how it's actually working. We don't have to worry or install a Kubernetes or OpenShift to actually manage our containerized applications, and we don't have to worry about any of those stuff. We just have to, you can just concentrate on just your coding, and then just maybe push it to GitHub or something, and then provide the link for the GitHub repo, or actually if you want, you can actually create an image for that and then pass the image to our application. So let's get back to our application. As you can see, our application is actually now available in this link. However, to make sure it's available, we can use this line right here, which should return the status of our application. As you can see, here is the status of our application. Here is the URL for our application, and here is the CPUs it's using, and here is the storage it's using, and here is the memory it's using, and it should be available through this port. And as you can see, it has a concurrent. It can actually serve 100 concurrent user per instance. So if we have more than that, it should be upscaling. And as you can see, we have maximum scale, which is the maximum number of instances we can have for this application to be 10, and the minimum number is 0. And then we have 300 milliseconds for the timeout time. For the runout time. Let me grab this link right here and try accept. As you can see, it sees the Swagger documentation of our API, and if we want to actually access the application, we can just add the app port at the end of our URL. I think it's still provisioning. That's why it's taking too long to open. It's 0 instance.
Did you add to the end of your URL for your deployed application? I can't remember what it was.
Yes, it's not about that. If I don't have even added, it should show a Swagger documentation. I think this caused something with the region. I think this is because of US. If I get back to the one I deployed in London, I think it should be running. So if I try this right here, now it's running. So it was just still deploying, I think. So it's running right here. The one in US South is running, and as I told you, if you just access the URL, you can see we have the Soga documentation of our API, so that if you want to use it from somewhere else other than this web UI, maybe in another application or something, and if you want to see the UI of our application, you have to append app to the end of it forward, and then you can see our application. Let me try it one last time and try to find out the labels, and then try to play a bit with the probability thresholds. As you can see, if I minimize this to 0, as you can see we have too many detected objects with like 2.6% accuracy, 3.1 or 1% even, and stuff like this. But as you increase the probability threshold, you can actually see we have the right labels right here, which is a person and a teddy bear. Okay, that's it. So with that, we have shown you how to deploy an application in a couple of minutes, just using the GUI of Code Engine, or actually using some very small and brief commands. So with just 3 lines of commands, we were able to deploy our application, or even through our GUI in a couple of minutes, and just inserting our image or our source code inside here, and just starting creating and specifying the name of our application, a project, and specifying the runtime semantics and stuff like this, and create everything is done for us, and everything is managed for us without having to worry about how to deploy or how to manage an orchestrator tool like Kubernetes or OpenShift or anything. So you get all of the good stuff about containers without having to worry about the management and the hustle behind how to connect so many moving parts and so many containers, and you don't have to actually install an orchestrator and actually consume some of your hardware or some of your infrastructure capabilities for installing some orchestrator. You can just go ahead and deploy your container as a serverless application or as a job directly from Code Engine or IBM Cloud. With that, my part comes to an end, and then I will send it back to Masa to summarize and share some very useful links with you.
Thank you, Mustafa. Okay, so this is that we are towards the end of our workshop for today. So just to summarize, it was definitely a journey throughout the workshop. So hopefully everyone learned with us about containerization, serverless, all the way to Code Engine. So in case if this information are a bit new to you, just to sum up, hopefully you'll get to explore them at some point later on. So containerization is a way to deploy your applications in fast, portable, and isolated environments, while as serverless is like the pay-as-you-go model. So you can scale your applications up and down based on traffic. So by means that you don't have to worry about infrastructure at all with the serverless, unlike when you're working with Kubernetes, for example, or virtual machines. So in Kubernetes, there is an open source project called Knative that helps you to build serverless applications in the Kubernetes environment. So it just eases for you the process of deploying, running, and managing your serverless applications in this Kubernetes environment. Similarly, you have a Code Engine. So there is a difference actually between Knative and Code Engine, because with Knative, you just still have to work with Kubernetes. You would still have to manage the entire cluster. But with Code Engine, you don't have to worry about any of that. The Code Engine is built on top of Kubernetes, and it leverages the uses of container orchestration platform and serverless architecture together and you don't have to worry much about managing it. So as you saw with Mustafa when he was doing the hands-on section, you simply had to create a project. Now this project can be compared to a namespace in Kubernetes where you'd have your pods created. So similarly, you create a project in Code Engine, and then you would create these applications or batch jobs in that project. So we had, for example, a couple of projects that several of us have access to them, where we can create the applications instantly. So Code Engine hides the complexities of Kubernetes, so you just only have to focus on writing your code instead of managing this hosting environment. And like you mentioned, you can deploy different types of applications that are based off container images or 12-factor applications, or just simple functions or batch jobs. So just a simple piece of code, and you can just run your application so easily. So if you would like to explore more, we'll share a bit with you details. But before that, I want to talk to you about AI Bootcamp, which is a call for code spot challenge. Make sure to check it out if you like, to help, working, tech for good, build applications for the good purpose of, fighting the challenges that we face in our lives. So go ahead and check out Call for Code Spot Challenge. You can find the links here to learn more about the AI Bootcamp, IBM.biz /YT Planet. If you want to register for it and learn more about it in a blog on AI Spot, here, this link here. We will share them with you in the chat in a bit. And finally, for the links, so in addition to the links that I shared with you, so we have this box note. Hopefully it will stay available. It has everything that you're going to need, from creation of your IBM Cloud services, IBM Cloud account, to resources to learn more on Code Engine. These are also links to the certifications that I talked about towards the beginning of the workshop. So in case if you are new to the term of containers or serverless, these are definitely going to be super useful for you to get started on your cloud native journey. So hopefully that everyone has joined us today, learned a lot with us. We will address any questions in the chat. Feel free to reach out to us through our emails and our social handles in case if you have any further questions after the workshops. So just make sure to fill in the survey. I will also share it with you guys in the chat. So you can tell us how this workshop went, and tell us how well did we do during the workshop. Hopefully we'll improve our upcoming workshops. This is the first time we're introducing a Code Engine in EMEA region, so we're super excited about it, and hopefully more to come of amazing workshops on Code Engine. So yeah, we'll respond to any questions you guys have in the chat. And thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of the day.